Good morning. I want us to take some time and look into what we call crime detection. Detecting crime is an important area in criminology and also in criminal law. It is difficult to prosecute a criminal case if it is not detected and the detection is accurate. Crime detection, therefore, is the beginning of a successful prosecution of a criminal case. Our discussion, therefore, seeks to understand three principal areas. Number one, we want to understand what exactly is meant by crime detection. And then number two, we want to look at the phases of the stages that are involved in detection of crime. And then we shall conclude our discussion by an analysis of some of the techniques that are available for crime investigators or criminal investigators to detect crime. I want to welcome you to this very, very important discussion, and I want to request all of you to pay keen attention to the discussion and note down any issue that you feel you may need more clarification or explanation on. Welcome. We begin by just an appraisal of what crime is before we go into what is meant by crime detection. Crime can be defined as the intentional commission of an act usually considered socially harmful or dangerous and is specifically designed, prohibited, and punishable under the criminal law. So when we talk of crime, we simply mean any action that is intentional in nature and that action is considered as being injurious or harmful or dangerous to individuals, society, and even to institutions. And that action must be defined as being prohibited and also appropriate punishment for its commission is prescribed. But we therefore understand crime detection as a process of identifying a crime, finding a suspect, and gathering evidence to prosecute the suspect. Therefore, when we talk of crime detection, we mean three major areas. One, identifying that a crime was committed. Secondly, finding a suspect or the people who are thought to have committed that crime. And then we conclude crime detection by gathering evidence that prosecutors or crime investigators may rely upon to convict, to have the suspect convicted. Crime detection falls into three phases. We have what we call the discovery that a crime has been committed. That is what we call the discovery phase. And then we have the identification of a suspect. That's another important phase. And then collection of sufficient evidence to indict the suspect before a court of law. So when you talk of crime detection, we simply mean the process of identifying a crime, then finding the suspect that is thought to have committed the crime, and then gathering evidence for purposes of presenting and prosecuting that particular suspect in a court of law. But even as we do this, we need to understand that there are phases through which the process of crime detection goes through. We have what we call the discovery phase, the identification of a suspect phase, and the collection of evidence to indict the suspect. So let's look at some of these phases in detail. Phase one, as we noted earlier, is the discovery phase. And the discovery phase of crime detection is normally the initial step in the process of identifying and investigating a crime. It involves discovering that a crime has been committed and collecting physical evidence from the scene of crime. A scene of crime is where the crime was committed. And also in this case, crime is recognized, that is, that actually a crime has been committed. Because if there is no way that it is possible to confirm that a crime has really been committed, then it is difficult for the investigation to proceed. It also at this stage that evidence is preserved. That is, you collect physical evidence from the crime scene. Physical evidence could be maybe tools or items that were used to commit murder. Physical evidence could also be the murder itself. If a person was killed, the person, the body is also part of physical evidence, and any other item that could be available. So that at that particular point, such physical evidence need to be preserved so that they are not interfered with, because the interference could actually lead to what we call contamination of evidence. And once evidence is contaminated, it can be difficult for that kind of evidence to be believed or being taken as credible in a criminal proceeding. The investigator is also required to approach the scene with care by preventing access by unauthorized persons, by locating and sealing it off. We have seen places being described a criminal scene, and once an area has been described as a criminal scene, then access into and out of that place is normally prohibited, because if access is permitted as at will, then again there's a possibility that the scene can be interfered with, and therefore once the scene is contaminated, it also contaminates the evidence, and the process, there would be doubts about the quality and credibility of the evidence that may be collected in future. Then we have the phase that we call the identification phase. An identification phase of a crime detection is a process of searching for and locating physical evidence at the crime scene. It involves using forensic science to analyze evidence to identify a criminal for purposes of onward processing. So that this identification phase of crime detection, that the search for evidence, for physical evidence such as fingerprints, blood stains, weapons that were used to commit crime, personal identification cards such as identification cards, ATM cards, or any other card, any other identification document that is associated with the people who are thought to have committed crime. Again, it's also at the identification stage that analysis of evidence is further done, such as analysis of DNA, fingerprints, blood stains, firearms, ballistics, toxicology, microscopy, and fire debris is done. So that it's at this stage that preliminary evidence is collected at the scene of crime. Again, you identify the criminals. Identification of the criminal also occurs at this stage of criminal detection using the evidence that has been gathered. So that when you talk of identification phase, it is simply searching or locating the crime scene as well as gathering preliminary evidence that point to commission of a crime, as well as identifying the individuals that are thought to have committed crime. Then we have another phase that we call the evidence gathering phase. Evidence, and when you talk about evidence, evidence is, in a criminal case, is any material or information that can be used to prove or disprove a fact in the case. And evidence can include documents, It can include physical objects, witness testimonies, and even expert testimonies. And the evidence gathering process involves collecting and analyzing potential evidence to answer a question or resolve an incident. And the evidence gathering process also involves hypotheses and question construction that require answers. In other words, investigators seek to ask or pose questions as to why was this crime committed? If it is murder, why was this person possibly murdered? What could be the cause of this? How did they get, say, to acquire firearms if they're not police officers? How did they scale up the wall and enter the person's premises and then kill him or her in his or her premises, despite, say, sufficient physical security measures, perimeter wall, CCTVs, and others being around? Why was all this all overcome by the suspects, and then they release the person for purposes of injuring or harming the person? It also, at this stage, that it also evidence gathering also involves collection of evidence from sources such as physical objects, communication gadgets, or social media posts, depending on the type of crime that is in question. Sometimes they look at communication that has occurred between the person and others. Are there signs that probably the person had warnings from, say, the people that killed him or her? So all these things have to be looked at. And evidence gathering also entails analysis of the evidence so as to make sense of the evidence, because not all the evidence gathered is actually used. Some might not be credible and others might not add value in terms of linking the suspect to the crime. And therefore, analysis of such evidence becomes necessary to ensure that evidence that later on is presented for purposes of proving the case is one that meets the required standards. We will look at evidence gathering and types of evidence that are normally gathered in another lesson. Then, at this stage again, you draw conclusions, and this is the last process of evidence gathering, which implies that using the evidence to answer the question or hypothesis that were developed earlier. So, evidence gathering is a very, very important phase in criminal detection, because if evidence is not gathered, because not all deaths could be a product of a criminal conduct. So therefore, evidence must be gathered to ensure that actually the death was not an accident. It was caused by other people. Then we have several techniques that have been used to detect crime. One of the techniques is called the crime scene investigation. A crime scene is any location that may be associated with a committed crime, and which can be the place where the crime took place, or can be an area that contains evidence from the crime itself. So when you talk of a crime scene, it is a place that is thought to have a place where crime is thought to have been committed. And crime scenes are not just limited to a location, that is a physical location, but can also be a person, a place, an object associated with the criminal behavior that occurred. For instance, if a knife was used to stab somebody to death, that knife can be part of the crime scene, and that knife has to be investigated. Crime scene, for example, might also mean that murder was committed somewhere and then the body was carried to maybe and thrown into a particular tree. So that particular tree also needs to be preserved, because it's also part of now of the crime scene. Crime scene investigation involves meticulous documentation and collection of evidence from the crime scene, such as footprints, fingerprints, bodily fluids, fibers, and even weapons. All these have to be looked at the point at which the crime was committed. So crime scene is quite important because it's at that stage, is at that point where initial evidence is normally gathered. And if crime scene cannot be located, then it becomes quite difficult. You say a body is just found on the road, thrown on the road, and it's not clear where the murder was committed, then it becomes quite difficult to investigate such a case because the absence of a crime scene complicates investigations into the cause of such murder. And crime scene investigation must be conducted carefully and thoroughly to ensure that crucial evidence is collected and fragile evidence is not destroyed in the process. There is evidence that is crucial, but others could also be fragile. So that fragility also needs to be served, because if it's not preserved and gets destroyed, then it'll be quite difficult for suspects to be fully brought to court and proof made against them that they're actually at the center of the commission of the crime. Law enforcement agencies must take action to block off the surrounding area, as well as yes, it is important for law enforcement agencies to take action to block off the surrounding area, as well as keep track of who comes in and goes out of the crime scene. So crime scene is an important area that needs to be preserved for the integrity of the evidence that is collected from that scene to be maintained. It is an important point at or in terms of crime detection. The other technique is called data mining. And data mining is a process of using statistical analysis and machine learning to discover hidden patterns, correlations, and anomalies within large databases. It's normally an approach used by crime investigators to discover hidden relationships among data by using artificial intelligence methods. Some of the methods that are used to carry out data mining as a technique of detecting crime is what we call classification. And this is a technique that is used to categorize data into predefined classes or categories based on the features or attributes of the data instances. The other one is what we call anomaly detection. And this one aims at identifying rare or unusual data instances that deviate significantly from the expected patterns. And it is useful in detecting fraudulent transactions, network intrusions, manufacturing defects, or any other abnormal behavior. It's also an important technique. The other one is what we call text mining, and it is used to extract valuable insights and knowledge from unstructured text data. And text mining includes tasks such as text categorization, sentiment analysis, topic modeling, and information extraction. All these are important aspects when it comes to detection of crime. Communication that has occurred between the person and another person becomes quite important. That's why the aspect of data mining becomes an important technique when it comes to detection of crime. The other technique is the use of artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, in short form known as AI, is a set of technologies that enable computers to perform a variety of advanced functions. For instance, facial recognition. And this one is extensively used for identifying criminals in sensitive areas, such as airports and railway stations, and therefore enhancing law enforcement capabilities. Normally, criminal agencies or intelligence agencies might have a database of personal characteristics, facial characteristics of a particular criminal, and therefore, when they are traveling through the use of facial recognition, they are able to detect crime. And this one is particularly used by the Interpol, or what we call the International Police Network, that can help in understanding transnational criminal activities or criminal conduct. The other one is what called neural networks, and it is used to predict criminal activities by analyzing sensitive data points, such as social media posts and internet usage. What are they posting? What are they communicating? And such things. Then we also have CCTV, is also an important instrument of detecting crime, and it is used to help prevent and detect crime and also to provide evidence to relevant enforcement agencies. Quite a lot of time when crime has occurred elsewhere, then analysis of the sensitive footage becomes important just to see were there movements that happened anywhere. Then again, we have what we call voice recorder. This is also a device that is used to transcribe and summarize speech and take notes during meetings. So voice recorder can also be used. Then we have what we call voice detector. And this one is used to analyze suspicious communication or verifying the authenticity of recorded statements, and has the ability to distinguish between human and AI voices. For example, somebody can talk in an audio, and through that audio, it might quite be difficult to understand whether it is a person who actually talked. So in that case, when a voice detector is used, it is able to determine exactly whether the voice was manipulated or it is true account of the individual that uttered the words. So voice detector can actually be used. For example, if a crime occurred somewhere and the person was recorded, the criminals were recorded conversing or discussing how to commit the crime, and their voice were recorded and then taken, then the voice detector can actually be used to see whether or not the recorded voice is actually that one of the suspects. The other method that can be used is what we call forensic science. And forensic science is basically the use of scientific methods or expertise to investigate crimes or examine evidence that might be presented in a court of law. It comes so many ways. One is toxicology. That is, it involves the study of the adverse effects of chemical substances on living organisms and the practice of diagnosis and treating exposures to toxins and toxicants. For example, if somebody is suspected to have been killed through poisoning, then the content of that person's stomachs can be taken for laboratory testing just to establish the kind of, if poison is available, and the kinds of poisons that were used. Then you have what we call digital forensics. And this one involves the discovery, investigation, examination, analysis of material found in digital devices, such as mobile devices and computer devices. This is important because sometimes communications that occur between individuals can be quite easy. For example, if somebody is accused to have hired hitmen to kill a given person, there's sometimes the financial transaction between the financial mobile money transfers the person has made can be used to see whether there were financial transactions that involve the suspects and the person who is thought to have been the mastermind of the murder. Then you have what we call forensic anthropology, and this one deals with the reconstruction of bodies from skeleton remains, skeletonized bodies, and bones to determine the age, sex, occupation, height, and cause of death. For example, there are instances where people are burned beyond recognition, cases of arson, so that people are burned beyond recognition. And it is sometimes quite difficult to understand whether the people who are burned, what were their ages? Were they children? Were they male? Or were they female? What was their height? And what could have been the cause of death? Then forensic anthropology now comes into play. Then you have what we call forensic accounting, and this is a specialized area of accounting that involves the application of accounting principles to establish fraud, anomalies, and other malpractices in accounting work. This is largely used in accounting work and to detect whether certain fraudulent transactions that border on criminal intent were actually committed. DNA analysis is also an important area. I think this is quite common, and I may not need to belabor much to explain. Then we have what we call forensic graphology. Graphology is a study of handwriting, especially that found in ransom notes, poison pen letters, or blackmail demands. For example, somebody forges a signature and uses that signature to commit crime, writes a letter purporting to have been, say, issued by the CEO of an organization to authorize payment, and then the person forges the signature of that particular person. Graphologists are able to compare the forged signature and the actual signature. Or somebody writes a threatening message that leads to the murder of somebody. Then we have graphologists who can actually study the handwriting to determine who the author is. So graphologists, forensic graphology is also an important area that can be used within the broader field of forensic science as a technique of detecting crime. I want to thank all of you for listening, and still want to wish to encourage you to take note of any issue that you feel needs more discussion and more engagement. Thank you so much for your time.